Hello and welcome to Lesson 5 in this Absolute Beginner series for Excel usage. If you haven't already done so, then I highly encourage you to complete the earlier lessons in this series by using the playlist link at the top right hand corner of the page. In these next few lessons, we'll be focusing on specific parts of the Excel ribbon, which we've already touched on in previous lessons. And today we're going to look at formatting. Let's take a look at the learning objectives in more detail. We'll look at some of the most common formats used for cell contents: general, text, number, percentage, accounting, and date, and how those formats influence the way we can manipulate them with other formats. We'll look in more detail at the cell content alignment options, and also revisit colouring and borders, and have a look at how to pick custom colours for our sheets. So go ahead, open up Excel and a new blank sheet, and we'll get started. In this lesson, we're going to have a bit of a closer look at formatting. So let's just start with a blank sheet. From cells A1 through to F1, let's create 6 headers called General, Text, Number, Percentage, Accounting, and finally Date. Let's highlight each of those columns and double click on the bar between F and G to just resize those cells. In fact, no, let's not do that. Let's right click on the column header and change the column width to a fixed width of, let's say, 30. There we go. And then we can spread that out across the whole sheet. Underneath the general header, I want to enter a series of numbers. So let's start with minus 1000. Then we want minus 50, minus a half, and then 0. And then we're going to reflect those numbers in the positive with 0.5, 50, and 1000. And in the last cell, A9, let's put the letter A in capital. Highlight the entries that we've put in by dragging your mouse. Go over the bottom right of the cell and drag that data across the range of our table. Now highlight the whole table, so you can either drag the mouse across it, like this, or you can click anywhere in the table and press Ctrl and A. Or the final methodology you could use would be to click in cell A1, hold down Ctrl Shift, press the right arrow and then the down arrow. And that will go all the way along to the last populated cell and all the way down to the last populated cell. And let's just put some borders on it. So we click here on the border tile and just put all borders on. This will help us see some of the differences in the formatting that we're going to apply to these cells. Okay, so now our table is set up. The reason we've selected these header titles is because they're the most commonly used formatting of numbers or letters on an Excel sheet. So let's go ahead and apply these formats to each of our columns. So if we select cell A2, press Ctrl, Shift and down, and we select all the contents, and then hover over here to where it says number at the top middle. Click on the small square with the arrow in, and let's make sure that those are formatted as general. So the general is selected, so we can see it okay. So general is the default format for most cells. Let's do the same here in the text. So again, press Ctrl, Shift and down to select the column contents. Click here on the small square with the arrow, and let's change the formatting of these cells to text by selecting text in the category box. And let's click OK. So you'll notice immediately when we formatted those cells as text how everything is put on the left hand side, whether it's a number or whether it's a letter. Let's go to the next column, column C, where we're going to apply numbers. So click in cell C2, click Ctrl, Shift and down arrow. Go here to your number format again. And this time we're going to format these cells as a number. So select number from the category. We can see here we've got a selection of decimal places. You can increase or decrease that with the arrows, or you can type in a specific number. Let's put it at 2, and you can choose to use a 1000 separator for the column. So let's apply that to begin with and click OK. So you'll notice now that the cells formatted as number that actually contain a numerical value are on the right hand side of the cell. The cell that has a letter in, so cell C9, remains on the left hand side of the cell. Even though if we click on it, it says it's a number, though it is a letter. And we can see that we've applied the comma between the 1000 separator here, and we've got 2 decimal places, no matter what our value is. If we once again just highlight those from cell C2 to C9, and we remove the comma separator and change the decimal places, and we click OK, we can see that that's applied, but it has no effect on the cell which only has text in, so C9. So let's move on to the next column. Highlight from D2 to D9. And let's format this as a percentage by choosing percentage from the category box. Again, you get to choose decimal places here, so we'll just leave it as 2 and click OK. So now we see that the contents of the cells are formatted as a percentage. So a percentage will appear as whatever number is in the cell multiplied by 100, and then it will have the percentage symbol after it. So we can see where we had minus a half, that's 50%. So it's with reference to 0 being 0% and 1 being 100%. So 0.5 is 50%. So you have to be especially careful when you're formatting cells as percentage versus cells as numbers, especially when you're performing multiplication operations or division operations. It can sometimes be difficult to track exactly what's in the numbers. So for example, if we multiplied a number in column C by a percentage in column D, so let's use row 6 for example here, where we've got 0.5 and 50%. So let's put in the equal sign, click on the cell with 0.5 in, multiply it by 50%. The answer we get is 0.25, which is indeed a half of 50%. However, if we change the format of this cell, let's just click on the percentage, we get a result of 25%, which is a half of 50%. And you just have to be careful like that because it can sometimes be very confusing when you're multiplying a number and a percentage. So let's just delete that for now and move on to the next column. So we're going to format this column in the accounting format. So once again, we'll just select it. Go to number, select accounting from the category. Again, we get a few options here, so you can change the number of decimal places. We can also choose to apply a symbol, so you can use your local currency. So for me, that's a pound, but you can pick dollars, yen, whatever you want, or you can actually choose to have none here at the top. So let's leave it on pound for now, and let's look at what it looks like. So you can see now in the accounting format, the numbers appear on the right-hand side of the cell, but the negative symbol appears on the left-hand side of the cell. You can see that there, just next to the pound sign. Let's just zoom in a little bit, show that a bit more clearly. So if we click down at the right at the bottom right here, next to where it says 100%, click the plus sign a few times. There we go, we can zoom in. So you can see clearly now that there's a negative sign there before the pound on all of the negative numbers. Also note that the 0 line appears as a dash in accounting format. So let's remove the currency symbol just to see what it looks like there. So we'll just click in, we'll just go back to accounting. We'll say none. And there we go. You can see the minus sign is a little bit more clear when we're doing that. Let's just zoom back out a little bit again. There we go. And the last column that we're going to look at is date. So dates are, and times for that matter, are a bit of an unusual one. And we'll spend a bit of time looking at this. So again, let's just select the column. Now obviously everything that we've got in there isn't a date right now, but let's just see what happens. So format, category date. So you can see we have a lot of different types of date format to choose from. So where we can use the month as a word, or we can use a choice of 2 digits or 4 digits, and there are many other different styles. Let's just apply the default one for now and click OK. So you can see immediately that these 3 cells here, F2, 3 and 4, have come up with loads of hashes in the cells, and that's telling us that there's something wrong. So, and we can actually see when we hover over it, we can see that it says dates and times that are negative or too large show as hash 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 hash. So we can't have negative dates, which makes sense. But what's going on in these ones here? This is our 0 line, row 5, and we've got a date of 01/1900. This is the first date within Excel, January 1900. And then every date after that is calculated as a number of days. So we see by the time we get to 1000, we're on the 26th of September 1902, which sounds about right. It's like almost 3 years away from 1900. So we can see the date format has no effect on our cell, which just has a letter in. So let's just explore this a little bit further by entering in a proper date. So instead of in this cell here where we've got our 0 value, let's enter in today's date, which for me is the 24th of March 2023. So let's format this in a different way, but still keep it as a date. So if we go to the date category again, so we can choose, for example, this one. And we can see now it changes to 24 March 2023. Or we could choose this one, where we have the month just displayed as a single digit. But what's most useful about this is you can actually customize the date that you put in. And you can choose that by selecting Custom at the bottom of the category list. And we can tell it how do we want this date formatted. If you use 3 letters, so DDD, so this signifies the day. So 3 letters will actually display like Mon for Monday, or Sat for Sunday, or Sun for Sunday. And in the same way, if we put a dash as our separator, we put MMM, it will see a 3-letter version of the month. So you can see a sample here above it. So it shows you what your date is going to look like, which is very useful. And we can put in like YYYY for a year. And then if we press enter, we can see now it says Friday, March 2023. And if we just copy that down to these other cells for now, you can see it automatically guesses the next day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. But what's useful as well, once you apply that format, is it doesn't matter then how you type your date in. So let's say we put it in as slashes between them. It will automatically reformat to whatever you formatted it before. So the other one we could use is we could put 4 Ds in and 4 Ms, and this will then give us the full word for the day and the month. So Friday, March 2023. There we go. And if we just copy that down again, we can see there Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So in this way, you can choose to represent your dates however you would like to. You can also change the separator between them. So I'll just quickly show that. So we could, for example, instead of having a dash, we could have a slash if we wanted. There we go, we have a slash between them then. So it's up to you how you use it, but be consistent about how you are using the date format so that everything always looks the same. And it also makes it easier to work with the data and manipulate it if you stick with the same format. So let's now just make sure that all of these dates are formatted in the same way before we go on to do anything else. So let's just select date and we'll just put it on the default one. There we go. So the next thing we want to look at is how these different types of format behave when we apply other formats to them, for example, like alignments. So let's take a look at that now. So to make sure that we can see exactly what's going on with this, let's just make our rows a little bit bigger. So rows 2 to 9, if we highlight them, right click and select row height. It's currently at 14.6, let's make it 25. So then nice and high. And let's once again just select all of the data in our table. And what we'll do is we'll go into the alignment section here. And let's just put everything at the moment for the top left and to the left. Let's change it and see what happens with all of the different formats. So let's center it vertically within the cell. So we can see that works for all of the formats that we've got. And likewise, if we put it at the bottom of the cell, it's the same. So we'll put it back to the top again. So let's now try and horizontally center it by clicking the icon here to center. So now we can see a difference. So for the vast majority of the cells, we can see that it did move it into the center, but for the accounting formatted cells in column E, it didn't. It just left them in exactly the same place. Though it did do it for the letter that was in there. So even though this letter here is formatted as accounting, it's treated it as a letter and it's formatted in the middle. So that's just an important thing to understand. I've just noticed actually we weren't viewing column A there, so let me just move it slightly to the left. And just to show you, for the general formatted cell, it did behave in the same way. So there we go. Send that vertically, on the down, back to the top, send that horizontally, and finally moved to the right. So you can see that for all of the different formats, the behavior is as expected, apart from the accounting format, and that's just something to be aware of if you do use the accounting format. The cell alignment functions don't work in exactly the same way because it always displays the number on the right hand side of the cell. So let's take a look now at some of the other options in the alignment section. So first let's have a look at these two icons here next to the horizontal alignment section, which are labelled decrease indent and increase indent. And what these do is move the text or number within a cell slightly in one direction or another. So again, if we just highlight everything and we click on this increase indent here, you can see there it moves the values in the cell slightly to the right or back the other way slightly to the left. This is useful if you want to slightly distinguish a list of your values of data underneath a header. So when we move it slightly to the right, we can see there, we can see the general sits on the top and we've like got a tab underneath it where the numbers are slightly away from the side. It also helps to see the numbers away from the side a little bit, especially if we look at the accounting format in column E here. So if we indent here, we can see actually the minus sign starts moving away from the left hand side of the cell, which makes it much easier to see. Okay, the next one up here is an orientation, and we're just going to look at this with respect to the headers that we have in row 1. So let's first just make that row a bit taller by dragging down here. There we go. Select everything in it. And click on the down arrow next to the small AB with the arrow on it. And we can see we've got a few options here. Let's select angle counterclockwise. So you can see what this does now is it angles the text away from where we are. It puts a little line on it. So, this is a nice way sometimes to just change the appearance of your headers. And again, we can do similar by angle clockwise, which then puts it in the other direction. Vertical text, which will then turn our horizontal text actually into vertical. We can't see it there. Let's just make the cell a bit bigger again. Drag it down here. There we go. So this is useful if you've got quite narrow columns of data, but you have long titles over them. So it makes you be able to fit your header text into a much smaller space without making the cells really, really wide. But I don't particularly like that format. I much prefer the next one, which we're going to look at, which is to rotate the text on there. So it keeps the same kind of format, but just points it in a different direction. And we've also got rotate text down, which does it in the opposite direction. And the final option here is just to go straight to the format cell alignment page, which then basically allows us to customize everything about it. You can get to this page in exactly the same way if we just cancel by right clicking on a cell and then selecting format cells from the pop-up menu. So there we go. And you can now specify all of your alignment options. We'll talk about these in a moment, these wrap text options, etc. And you can also actually pick a custom rotation orientation of the cell by moving this around here. And there we go, you can see there. Yeah, let's just Control and Z to undo that for a moment. There we go. So in this way, you can customize the appearance of what's in your cell in a variety of different ways and help it stand out. And certainly, with longer titles and headers, make it easier for someone to read it when it's in a narrow cell. So like we see, for example, here, if we narrowed the cell right up, there, we can still fit the word general in this orientation. But if we went back to just whatever we had originally, rotate text down off, you can see now you can't actually read the word general and you would have to make the column wider, which now spaces out our data. So if you didn't want to do that, it's often a good idea to rotate it around. Let's now take a look at the next option in this alignment category, which is wrap text, we can see here. So as the description suggests, wrap text will automatically put text that reaches the end of the cell border, onto the next line. So let's just demonstrate that. So let's go to the percentage cell, for example. Let's just align it back to where it was before by taking this rotate off. Okay. And instead of it just saying percentage, we're just going to say percentage of the contents of the cell entered. Now you can see normally here, we can't see all of the text that's in this cell because it runs over the side. But now if we click on it and we click wrap text, you can see there now it automatically puts the cell text on the next line. And if we shrink the column slightly, you can see it continues to do that. There we go. Right up until if we actually make it smaller than the first word, it will even wrap the word down to the next line. But that's not very good and doesn't read very well. So let's move it back out again. And there we go. So that's what wrap text does. Very useful. The final option, which is defaulted in the alignment section on the ribbon, is merge and center. And what this does now is to actually take what's in a cell and merge it across columns. So let's just show you that as an example. So again, let's take our data here that we've got percentage of the contents of the cell entered, and let's select cells D, E and F. And if we click merge and center, it will give us a warning to say that we only keep the data in the upper left cell. So we're only going to keep what's in cell D1. So we say OK, and there we go. So we now have the contents of cell D1 merged across 3 columns. And this is useful for when you want to have main headers over subheaders, for example. So, you can put those in the columns above the subheaders and make your table nice and tidy. Something to just note about merging cells though is if we want to reference the cell in a formula, so let's say down here we wanted to reiterate that cell in a different cell, and if we press equals, we click now on the merge cell, we can see here in the formula bar it only references cell D1. So D1 was this cell here, the top left cell. And if we press enter, it spits out the contents of that cell. But if we enter E2, for example, oh, sorry, not E2, we want E1, it comes back with nothing. Likewise, if we enter F1, it comes back with nothing. And that's because these are merged cells. So if you need to reference anything that's in a merged cell, always only pick the cell at the top left. It's best actually to stay away from merged cells if you are referencing them, and only reference cells within a specific cell, because it can cause complications as well when you're copying and pasting around and dragging data down. So it's best to avoid it if you can. There are some other options next to the merge and center option by clicking the down arrow. So we can choose to unmerge our cells merge cells and merge across, and these behave just in slightly different ways, so feel free to experiment with them and see how they affect your data. For now, let's just unmerge this by clicking unmerge cells. There we go, puts it back in there. Notice how when we unmerged it, it didn't put back what we overwrote in these two cells here. So just be careful about that. So we've looked now at all of the default alignment options that are provided on the ribbon. But note also we can enter the format cell the same way that we right clicked on it just by clicking this little arrow here with the little box around it, and that will again take us to this overall format cell where we can choose to do everything that we want to with alignment. You can also pick those categories of formatting that we looked at before. We can change the font here and the color. We can apply borders, fill the cells, and we can put protection on the cells, but protection is not something I'm going to cover within the scope of these basic tutorials. And just as a final entry into this formatting section, let's just refresh our memories about just providing basic formatting, changing fonts, colouring cells and that kind of thing. And we do that all within this section here of the ribbon where it says font. So again, if we select just this header row here, we can pick a font here using the down arrow. Let's change it to something totally different like Bauhaus 95. And there we go, it applies it there. We can click on the B to apply bold, on and off, I for italics, on and off, and the U for underline. Notice also the arrow next to the U for underline, we can select a double underline, and then we can apply that. And that's basically it's a toggle between single underline or double underline. And to take them back off again, you simply click on them. These three icons here, it's useful to know that you can keyboard shortcut to those, which it tells you. So bold is Control and B, italic is Control and I, and underline is Control and U. And to apply colouring, so we did look at this very briefly in an earlier tutorial, so we'll just look at it in a little bit more detail now. So the fill can here applies colouring to the background of the cell, and if we click on the down arrow, we can pick here from the default palette of colours, and we can choose a colour from those simply by clicking on it. You can also click no fill here to remove anything that's on there. And finally, you can click more colours down here to pick some custom colours. So initially, you'll get a greater selection from the colour hexagon of standard colours, but you can pick any colour you want by simply clicking on the custom tab, and we get this whole grid now of colours to pick from. If you know a specific colour, or perhaps you're using a brand template that requires you to use specific colours, you can enter the RGB value within these three cells here. And the colour for the text works in exactly the same way. So the A with the red line under here, we click on the down arrow, we get to pick from the default colour palette first. Okay, we can select more colours here, and we get the same type of selection before increased palette of standard colours and the custom palette. And there we go, and in that way you can make your sheets and charts, whatever you like, very, very much more colourful and help them stand out. If we select everything once again in the header, we can also change the font size simply by changing the number here. You can either type something in, okay, or you can select using the down arrow and it will give you set font sizes. You can also quickly increase or decrease the size of the font using the A and smaller a that are next to the sizing. So clicking once, there we go, we can make it bigger and bigger and bigger, and then make it smaller and smaller and smaller. There we go. And the final option in this font section is the borders section. So we've looked at this again briefly before, but we'll just refresh it again. So let's just select our whole table, for example. Click on the down arrow here next to where it says borders, and we have a selection of default things. So notice right now we've actually got borders on all of the cells. So if we click, say, for example, bottom border, then click away, we don't see any difference because we've actually got borders applied to all areas of the cell right now. So let's just pick the whole table again. let's take all the borders away by selecting no border. And there we go, we can now see there are no borders around the table. Let's just select the header area. Bottom border, does exactly what it says on the tin, just applies a line on the bottom. So top, left and right do the same, all borders, outside border. So for example, if we select our area again, outside border applies a square just around what we selected. We can have a thick outside border. There we go. You can combine these together by perhaps selecting this area here. There we go, and now we have a nice thick border separating our cells. Yeah. So note now, if we apply the normal border over the top of this, so let's apply all borders here, for example, in the header area, we can see now that that thick line gets overwritten with a thin line. So if you wanted to put it back, you would have to put this box back here again and select thick borders. There we go. Now we've got segregation between our header and our table. If you want a particularly custom style, you can always go into the font area here with the little square and arrow on it and go into the borders section here, and this will now allow you to pick and choose. You can have dashed borders, you can choose to outline the cell or inside the cell, and lots of different types of things. And in fact, you can do all of your formatting options from here. So you can see it's got the fill area on here. You have some neat fill effects. So you can put a gradient into a cell, for example. So let's say vertical, pick one of these and click OK. And there we go, we have a lovely smooth gradient border there. Loads and loads of different options, and I encourage you to just go and play around with stuff and see what you like. You can't do any harm with them, and just get used to using them and making your tables look nice. So that covers everything that I wanted to go through about formatting in a little bit more depth. Now just remember, whilst you do have this vast array of formatting options, colours and fonts, for professional use it's best to restrict them. Too much clutter, too much difference in the way things look can detract away from the importance of information that you might be presenting. So let's just have a quick recap on what we learned today. We learned about 6 of the most common formats: general, text, number, percentage, accounting and date, and how they are affected by different things that are applied to cells, like cell alignment. We looked in more detail at those alignment options, how to rotate your text, make it vertical for example, to help when we have wider or narrower columns and still being able to see the data labels that we have within them. And finally, we revisited font and cell colouring and the borders that we use around them in a little bit more detail. I hope you found today's content useful, and if you did, please remember, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment under the description, and I hope to see you in the next lesson. Bye for now.